Christmas was supposed to be a time of warmth, joy, and celebration. But for one mom, it was just another battle, another night doing her best to make ends meet. Another holiday where surviving mattered more than the presents. He had done everything he could. He worked extra shifts. She skipped meals to make sure her kids had enough. He put a small Christmas tree in the living room, even if there were no presents under it. Because, no matter how difficult things got, she refused to let her children feel the weight of her difficulties. But on Christmas Eve, when she stepped outside for a moment to get some air in the cold night, she had no idea that someone was watching her. Someone who was once that child who had nothing. Someone who understood exactly why I was struggling. Mike Tyson wasn't planning on stopping that night. But when he saw her, when he saw the little house with the flickering porch light, when he saw the silent weariness in her eyes, he knew he had to do something. Because this Christmas, his family wasn't going to wake up with nothing. Not if it depended on Mac. The air was chilly, that kind of December chill that sneaks into your bones and clings to your fingertips. Christmas lights flickered at the sails, laughter escaped from warm houses, and the aroma of festive dinners floated in the air. But for some, the holiday season wasn't filled with warmth. It was just another day trying to get by. Mac Chasen had spent Christmas in many different ways, some in mansions, some in hotels, some in places he wished he could forget. But this year, while driving through the quiet streets of a small neighborhood, I was not looking for a party. I was looking for someone to help. The city was full of the Christmas spirit, cars with trees tied on the roof, warm families walking next to festive decorations. The distant sound of carols under the streetlights. The world felt festive, full of warmth, full of joy. But as McClayson drove through a quieter part of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone was celebrating. It wasn't something I could see, it was something I could feel. And then, as he turned a corner, he saw it. A small house, barely lit, resisting the cold. A flickering porch light. A thin layer of frost on the roof. A tiny Christmas tree shining from the front window, but under it, no gift, no decoration, just empty. Mac slowed the car down. Something in that house stopped him in his tracks. A woman came out on the porch, hugging herself against the cold of the night. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, but the exhaustion on her face made her look older. His coat was thin, too light for the cold. His shoes were worn out, the soles barely holding up. Her posture was not one of defeat, but it was heavy, as if she were carrying something bigger than herself. He leaned on the railing, exhaled into the night air, and raised his head to the sky, as if looking for something, anything, to remind him that things would get better. And Mike had seen that look before. Because once, it had been her mother who was outside, looking at the sky, wondering how she was going to get through the next day. Mac's eyes went back to the window, to the little Christmas tree that stood proudly in the corner. It was not luxurious, just a few garlands of lights, a couple of handmade ornaments, and a star on the top, that tilted slightly to one side. But it was placed with care, as if whoever put it on did it with love, even if he didn't have much else. And under him, nothing. No box wrapped in bright colors. No hanging stockings. No sign that Christmas morning would bring anything more than just another ordinary day of struggle. Max's chest tightened. Why this? This wasn't just another house. This was a struggle for dignity. And the woman on the porch. He was doing everything he could to hold on to her. Mike didn't think twice about it. He did not hesitate. He didn't tell himself that it was none of his business, that maybe someone else would help, that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Instead, he stopped, got out of the car, and walked towards the house. The woman heard his footsteps before she saw him. She turned around, surprised, her eyes widened in amazement as she recognized him. "Good evening," Mac said, his voice calm, steady. Her breath caught, as if she wasn't sure if this was real. "Mac. Tyson?" he asked, almost not believing his own words. He smiled slightly. "Yes," he replied. "I was just passing by." She blinked, still dazed, still unsure. Max pointed to the house with a slight shake of his head. "Is this your home?" She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, trying to make it be." And at that moment, Mac knew this wasn't just about Christmas. It was about something bigger. She wasn't complaining. He wasn't apologetic. He did not explain why there were no gifts under the tree, because his coat was too thin, because exhaustion marked his face. She just stood there, holding her ground the only way a mother could. Mac had seen wrestlers in the ring, men who had taken blow after blow, and were still standing. But this was a different kind of fight. A fight where he had no gloves, no mouthguard, no defense, just pure determination. To make sure his kids never knew how hard it really was. Mac's respect for her grew instantly. Because true strength isn't always about the fists. Sometimes, it's about carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and not letting it crush you. "Do you have children?" Mac asked in a soft voice. The woman nodded. "Two," he said. "They're asleep." Mac looked back to the window, then back to it. "Do you have everything ready for Christmas?" She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Yeah, we're fine. Just keeping it simple this year." And that was the moment Mac knew he was lying. "Not because I wanted to, but because I had to." Because when you're a parent, you don't let the world know how hard it is. You don't let strangers see the struggle. You don't let your kids feel the weight of what they don't have. But Mike saw it right away. Mike didn't ask any more questions. He didn't pressure her to admit anything. It didn't make her feel like she had to explain herself. Because this wasn't about charity. This was about respect. And Nike had been exactly in this place before, a kid going to bed on Christmas Eve, knowing that when the morning came, there would be no presents waiting for him, no special breakfast, just another day of surviving. So at that very moment, he made a decision. This Christmas, her kids weren't going to wake up with nothing. Mike didn't wait. He did not hesitate. He didn't waste time thinking about it too much. Within an hour, I had made the calls. A delivery truck was loaded, bags were filled, gifts were wrapped. Not just toys. Not just Christmas decorations. But warm clothes, food, blankets, everything that a mother should not have to struggle to get. Because Christmas wasn't just about the big things. It was about the little details that made people feel seen. And tonight, Mike was going to make sure she felt it. The next morning, just as the sun was starting to rise, the same knock sounded on the door. The woman opened it, not expecting anything. And instead, he found everything. Bags of wrapped gifts. Food boxes. Coats for the winter. A tree, bigger than the one I had, ready to be placed in the living room. And on top of everything, an envelope. Inside, a handwritten note. Merry Christmas. Keep fighting. Mac. And under that, enough money to make sure that this was not just a one-time gift, but the beginning of something better. Her children woke up that morning to a Christmas they never expected. Laughter filled the house. Emotion replaced worry. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow. Why today? They had everything they needed today. And Mac had given them more than gifts. He had given them hope. The air outside was cold, but the silence between Mac and the woman felt even heavier. She had answered his question. Yes, she had children, and yes, they were asleep. But it wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. Her voice was steady, but behind her, Mac could hear something deeper. Exhaustion. Doubt. That silent pause before speaking, the kind of pause that happens when someone is trying to decide how much of the truth they should really let out. Matt knew that pause well. She had heard it in her own mother's voice, in the voices of people who had spent too much time being strong for others, while carrying burdens that no one else saw. And now, this woman was carrying more than she was saying. She had smiled when she answered him, polite and careful, as someone who does not want pity does. But his eyes. Her eyes told a different story. There was no brightness in them, no lightness, no sign of the excitement that Christmas Eve was supposed to bring. Instead, there was tiredness, not just the kind that comes after a long day, but the kind that comes after a long year. The kind that settles into the bones, that makes every little task feel heavier than it should be. Mac recognized him immediately. Why had I seen him before? And why had he felt it before? Do you have everything ready for Christmas? Mike asked, keeping his voice calm. And the second the words left her mouth, he saw her getting ready. It was subtle, a slight shift in her shoulders, a momentary squeeze of her jaw, a deep breath before she spoke. I wasn't just answering a question. He was preparing for it. Yes, he said with a slight nod. We're fine. Just keeping it simple this year. And there it was again, the pause. The pause that said everything his words didn't say. Mac let the silence settle in between them, let it spread just long enough for her to feel it. Because sometimes, when people are used to struggling, when they've spent too much time pretending that everything is fine, they need a moment to realize that they don't have to pretend. That someone actually sees them. That someone really cares. She changed her position, rubbed her arms as if trying to shake off the cold, and looked sidelong towards the house. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, It's been a tough year, but you know, we managed. That was the truth. Right there, buried in that last sentence. Mac's eyes went back to the window, to the small tree that stood in the corner of the dimly lit room. It wasn't just about the tree itself, but what it represented. It had been lovingly placed, decorated with whatever they could find, but it was not covered with ornaments. It was not surrounded by wrapped gifts, it did not shine as brightly as those in other houses. It was a Christmas tree, but it wasn't Christmas. And the woman who was in front of him. She knew that. And that broke her heart in a way she would never say out loud. He wasn't complaining. I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't even hinting at how difficult it all was. Because that's what mothers do. They put everyone else first. They carry on the struggle in silence. They smile through the pain. And this woman. I was doing exactly that. Mike felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For as much as she had fought on the Rhine, as much as she had fought in her own life, she knew that there was no harder fight than the one she was facing at that moment. The fight of a mother trying to make sure her children never felt the weight of the things they didn't have. Mac had been there less than 5 minutes. But I already knew that. He had made the decision before she had finished her last sentence. Because this wasn't about feeling sorry for someone. It wasn't about charity. It was about respect. It was about making sure that a woman who had given everything for her children didn't have to wake up tomorrow wondering how she would make them feel special. Because Christmas wasn't about money. These were not expensive gifts. It was about making sure the people she loves felt seen, valued, cared for. And tonight, McKee is going to make sure this woman and her children felt all of that and more. Are you working late? Mac asked, changing the conversation. The woman let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing she could do. Every night, he admitted. 2 jobs. Sometimes 3, when I can take extra shifts. Just trying to keep everything stable. Micah felt, feeling the weight of his words to sit on her chest. I wasn't struggling because I wasn't trying. I was struggling because I never stopped trying. And that was exactly why I was about to change everything. Mike Tyson had spent his life in fights, some in the ring, some outside of it. And the biggest thing I had learned was that not all fights are won with fists. Some fights are won by lifting people up when the world keeps knocking them down. Some fights are won by making sure that a mother who has fought every day for her children can see him smiling on Christmas morning. And some fights you don't even think twice before getting into them. Because this was not an election. This was something Max knew he had to do. Mike Tyson wasn't the kind of guy who stood by when he could do something. And tonight, he wasn't just going to make sure this family had a Christmas. She was going to make sure she was never forgotten. Because this woman had spent too much time carrying the weight of it all by herself. And this year, I wasn't going to carry it anymore. Mike Tyson had made many decisions in his life, some fast, some slow, some that changed everything. But this one? This wasn't even a decision. The second he saw the exhaustion on that mother's face, the way she stood her ground despite the weight of everything pressing down on her, he knew. The second he looked again at that little tree in the window, shining softly in a house that had been stripped of every luxury except love, he knew. The second he realized that tomorrow morning, 2 children would wake up with only hope in their hearts and no gifts to match it, he knew. And when you know something so deep in your soul, you don't wait. You act. And that's exactly what McCassin did. Mike was not a man to hesitate. He had made a career based on his instincts, in the ring, in life, in moments like these. So as soon as he got back to his car, he picked up his phone and made a call. "Hey," he said as soon as the voice on the other end of the line answered. "I need you to do something." Tonight? His friend, someone who had worked with him for years, someone who never asked questions, knew that when Mac Jason said something like that, you just had to listen. "What do you need?" Mac looked once more toward the house, at the woman still standing on the porch, rubbing her arms against the cold. "One Christmas," he said simply. "A real one." Most people spent Christmas Eve wrapping presents, drinking hot chocolate, settling in for a quiet evening. Mike was about to make sure a mother in distress and her children woke up to a miracle. In less than an hour, a van was loaded. Not only with toys, not only with decorations, but with everything. Warm coats, fresh groceries, a Christmas dinner that could feed them for a week. A new tree, because the one in that house was too small, too simple, because if they were going to have a Christmas, they were going to have it right. And at the bottom of one of the bags, an envelope, because Max knew that the gifts were only part of the problem. He wasn't just going to make sure they had a Christmas morning. He was going to make sure they had a future. It was almost midnight when the van pulled up in front of the house. Max sat in his car for a moment, watching the quiet street, the glow of the street lamps reflecting off the frost-covered pavement. The woman inside had no idea what was about to happen. She had probably already put her children to bed. She had probably kissed their foreheads and told them that Santa always finds a way. And Mac was about to prove him right. The knock on the door was soft, almost doubtful. Because how do you prepare someone for something that will change their life? From inside, he heard soft footsteps, the creaking of old wood, the careful turning of a doorknob. And then, the door opened. And for the second time in the evening, the woman came face to face with Tyson. Only this time, he was not alone. Behind him, a group of people were standing, their arms full of gifts, bags of food, warm blankets, and more. And at that moment, she did not say a word. Because sometimes, when something is too big to understand, the words don't come out. For an instant, he just stood there. He covered his mouth with his hands, his body was frozen in place. And then, the tears came. Not the ones that spring up out of sadness. Not the ones that come because of frustration or defeat. But the ones that spill out when you've been holding something back for too long, when the weight of life has been too heavy, and for the first time, someone helps you carry it. He shook his head, not in denial, but in disbelief. Mac, he whispered, his voice breaking. And Mike just smiled. Because I knew exactly what this moment meant. That night, after the presents were placed under the tree, after the fridge was full, after the house was filled with things they never expected to have, Max quietly retired. Because this wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about getting credit. It was about what would happen in the morning. And when the sun finally came out, when two sleepy-eyed children rubbed their eyes and staggered into the living room, they did not wake up to anything. They woke up with a miracle. A bigger tree, brighter lights, lots of presents wrapped in shiny paper. Coats that fit them well. Toys they never dreamed of having. And his mother. She just sat on the couch, looking at them, letting the moment sink into her heart. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how to make ends meet. He was just watching his kids be happy. And that was everything. Later that morning, when the excitement subsided, the mother found the last thing Mac had left, the envelope. He opened it carefully, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the letter out from inside. The first thing they saw was a check big enough to change their lives. The second thing he saw was Mac's handwriting. Merry Christmas. Keep fighting. You are stronger than you think. Mac. And this time, when the tears came, she let them flow. People are always talking about the gifts they get at Christmas. Things wrapped in boxes. The surprises waiting under the tree. But the best gifts. It's not always things. Sometimes, they are the feeling of knowing that you are not alone. Sometimes, they are the weight that disappears from your shoulders. And sometimes, they are the moment when someone shows up when you least expect it and changes your life forever. Mike Tyson didn't grow up with easy Christmases. He knew what it was like to wake up and wait for something that never came. And that's why, when she saw someone fighting the same battle, when she saw a mother trying to give her children a Christmas without knowing how, she didn't hesitate. Because true strength, it's not just about what you can bear. It's about what you can give. And this Christmas, Mike Tyson gave more than gifts. It gave hope. The sun was just beginning to rise, its first golden rays spreading over the rooftops of the quiet neighborhood. The air was still, the world enveloped in the peaceful silence of Christmas morning. But inside a small house, something extraordinary was about to happen. The children were still asleep, curled up under their blankets, their dreams filled with the kind of magic that only children believe in. Her mother was sitting in the dim light of the living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I was exhausted, but for the first time in years, I wasn't worried. Because today, everything was different. And she was about to see her kids wake up to something they had never seen before. For years, Christmas mornings had been quiet in their home. Not because they didn't celebrate. Not because they didn't believe in the magic of the season. But because, sometimes, survival had to come before celebration. She had done the best she could, always finding little things, little surprises, making sure her children never felt like they had less. Even when they did. I had wrapped second-hand toys as if they were new. I had baked cookies with the last bit of sugar in the house. I had told them that Christmas was about love, not things. And they had believed him. They had never complained. They had never asked why other children had more. She had never been made to feel like she wasn't doing enough. But today, they would wake up to a Christmas that would feel like the one she always dreamed of giving them. The house was still in gloom when the youngest one moved in first, rubbing his sleepy eyes, stretching out his little arms. Before blinking towards the ceiling. Something felt different. Maybe it was the quiet excitement in the air. Maybe it was the way the room seemed brighter than usual. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because this morning, for the first time, he could feel that something magical was waiting for him. She turned around, gently pushing her older sister, whispering to her, "Wake up, I think Santa came." At first, she grunted, not wanting to get out of the warmth of her blankets. But then he opened his eyes. And he saw the light shining from under the door. And that was it. The moment that turned an ordinary Christmas morning into something unforgettable. They didn't walk. They ran. Small feet hitting the floor, small hands struggling to turn the doorknob, whispers turning into laughter. As they burst into the living room together. And then, they stayed frozen. Because what they saw made no sense. His little Christmas tree, the one that had always stood alone in the corner, with only a few simple decorations, was no longer alone. He was surrounded by gifts. Wrapped boxes, boughs, a mountain of gifts that they had never dared to imagine. And for a long moment of silence, they just stared. Why? How? How was this possible? How had it happened? And then, as if realizing that they were not dreaming, they shouted. Not out of fear. Not because of confusion. But out of pure, overwhelming, uncontrollable joy. The mother had been watching them from the kitchen door, her hands trembling slightly, the tears burning behind her eyes. I knew what was coming. I knew what would happen when they saw him. But I wasn't prepared for this, for the way their laughter filled every corner of the house. For the way their little bodies were shaking with excitement, for the light on their faces in a way I had never seen before. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't trying to hide the disappointment. She wasn't preparing for the moment when she would have to explain why Christmas was small again this year. Because today, there was nothing small about her. The children threw themselves on the pile of presents, their hands moving faster than their minds could process. Tearing paper, gasping with each new discovery. New coats. Shoes that really fit them well. Toys that were not second-hand, that were not worn out, that were not something that another child had left behind. And then, as if the morning couldn't get any better, the mother noticed something she hadn't seen before, a box, quietly placed to the side, with her name written on it. His breathing stopped. Because Christmas had never been for her. He had never allowed himself to do that. But now, he took the box with trembling hands, slowly opened it and found a warm winter coat. A new pair of boots. And under them, an envelope. Her fingers were trembling as she opened the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. And when he read the first words, he let out a trembling sigh. Merry Christmas. Keep fighting. You are stronger than you think. Mac. And under that, a check. A big enough check to make sure he didn't have to struggle anymore. A check big enough to change everything. And at that moment, while holding it in her hands, she realized something. This was not just a gift. This was freedom. Her son picked up a small note that had fallen to the floor. Mom, look, he said excitedly. Says Mac. Who is Mac? She quickly wiped her eyes, trying to stand her ground. She smiled and knelt down so she could look into his eyes. He's someone who wanted us to have the Christmas we deserve, she said softly. And her daughter, still hugging a new teddy bear, whispered, we should say thank you. The mother nodded, looking out the window at the quiet street, where she had last seen Mike Tyson standing. He already knows, she whispered. The rest of the day was full of laughter. Of joy. Of that pure happiness that cannot be faked, that cannot be forced, that cannot be anything other than real. The kind of happiness that comes from knowing that, for once, life had given them more than they asked for. And for the first time, they didn't have to pretend. Because today, they had everything they had ever wanted. Mike Tyson had spent his life in fights. Fighting for his name. Fighting for their place in the world. Fighting to survive. But the best fights, they're not the ones you win on the Rhine. They are those in which you give something that cannot be taken away. And on this Christmas morning, in a small house where two children were laughing and a mother was crying tears of happiness. For the first time in years, Mike Tyson had won another fight. Not with his fists, but with his heart. The house, which used to feel heavy from the daily struggle, was now bursting with laughter, excitement, and the sound of wrapping paper being ripped off. Children were running from one gift to another, their faces were shining with disbelief, their hands were clutching new toys, warm coats and things they had never dreamed of having. Her mother sat quietly on the sofa, watching, absorbing, holding back tears that she no longer had to hide. I had spent so many years trying to make something out of nothing, but today, I didn't have to. For the first time in a long time, I could just let them be kids. And that was the best gift of all. He ran his fingers through the letter again, reading Mac's words over and over, as if trying to make sure they were real. Merry Christmas. Keep fighting. You are stronger than you think. Mac. She had spent so much time doing everything by herself, carrying every weight without complaining, without expecting help from anyone. And yet, here was a man from whom she had never asked for anything, changing her life in ways she could never have imagined. Her son looked up from his mountain of gifts, holding the small note in his hands. "Who is Mac?" he asked, with curiosity in his young eyes. She smiled, her heart full in a way it had never been before. "Someone who believed in us," he said softly. And that was all they needed to know. Mike Tyson had fought battles all his life. Some in the ring. Some in the streets. Some against the world, and some against himself. But this one? This was a victory that didn't come with a championship belt. It came with the children's laughter. With the silent relief of a mother who no longer had to wonder how she would get to tomorrow. With the knowledge that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to fight for yourself, but to lift someone else up. And this Christmas. That's exactly what he did.